Welcome to the Misophonia podcast. This is episode 210. My name is Adil Ahmad, and I have Misophonia. This week I'm talking to Alex from beautiful Victoria, British Columbia. Alex shares her lifelong journey with misophonia, which began at around age 11 amid a turbulent home life. She opens up about her sensitivity to sounds, especially during family meals, that became tied to a need to escape overwhelming emotion. Through therapy, Alex discovered how these triggers were linked to deeper childhood trauma and learned to reframe her actions with self-compassion. From feeling isolated and misunderstood to finding tools for healing, her story is really a powerful reflection on resilience, emotional awareness, and a path towards self-acceptance. After the show, let me know what you think. You can reach out by email at hello@misophoniapodcast.com or hit me up on Instagram or Facebook at Misophonia Podcast. And by the way, please head over and leave a quick rating or review wherever you listen to the show. It really helps more listeners find the podcast. And a few of my usual announcements. If you want to come on the podcast, just go to misophoniapodcast.com and click the Become a Guest link. It's really easy to pick a time slot and you'll get all the details. There are guides for home improvement. I know this is 2025. You might have goals for wanting a quieter home. And there are a lot of guides on the site if you go to misophoniapodcast.com/guides. And misophonia.shop is open. I relaunched the merch shop. You can find all kinds of great things about the podcast, AirPod cases, shirts, hats. Yeah, it all goes to support the show. And also, a portion will go to fund research through SoQuiet and some special projects that I will be announcing later this year. Thanks for the incredible ongoing support of our Patreon supporters. Shout out to new Patreon supporter Chelsea. If you feel like contributing, you can read all about the various levels at patreon.com/misophoniapodcast. All right, now here's my conversation with Alex. Alex, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you here.
Why, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit of kind of roughly where you're located and, what you do.
Yeah, I'm located in Victoria, British Columbia.
It's like my dream city to move to, by the way.
It's quite magical. Yes.
I'm Canadian, so I mean, I can easily go there. It's just like one of these days.
One of these days, yeah. It is a lovely place to live. I'm very, very grateful. And yeah, I work as a healthcare aide, and I work at a hospital in the emergency department. So it's more of a recent kind of career shift, but yeah, that's what I've been doing. It's a lot of stimuli. So this my job definitely brings up some stuff, but yeah, that's kind of what I do. Yeah.
Yeah, I've talked to a number of people in healthcare, actually, even in nursing, healthcare aides. So that's interesting. A lot of people gravitate towards that. Probably not necessarily because of sensitivities. I would think probably the opposite.
Yeah.
But I guess I don't. Yeah, maybe let's start there. Obviously, we'll get into your background, but tactically, day to day, how do you? You said lots of stimuli. Do you take times for breaks? How do you figure that out? Do your coworkers know, colleagues know about misophonia?
Yeah. So no one knows. The environment is very fast paced, and I don't actually know a lot of my coworkers super well quite yet. I'm pretty new to the department, so they don't. So at times it is quite isolating because I find myself being so overwhelmed at times and have no one really to explain or articulate it to, because for people who've never heard of it, it's such a bizarre concept to understand if you've never experienced it yourself.
Right.
But I definitely make an effort to, I take a lot of walks outside. I find just being outside in the fresh air and, yeah, just a change of scenery, not so many blaring lights and sounds and, but yeah, definitely just like taking time to breathe and taking time to just settle into my body and kind of, calm my nervous system, because that's obviously
big.
always in fight or flight.
Yeah. So, and I would think that also, um, if it's so fast paced, you're never in the same place or same situation for very long, right? Which probably kind of helps.
Yeah, for sure. And I find it's less, it affects me less because I find I'm most affected by repetitive
Mm,
sounds or visual stimuli. So here, it's not so much repetitive, which yeah, and because it's so fast paced and I'm always moving around and dealing with different clients, it is I think a lot more. It's a lot easier to navigate for sure.
gotcha, gotcha.
Yeah.
And so yeah, you said you were oh well, actually you said visual stimuli, so I'm assuming misokinesia is a big part of your experience.
Yeah, actually, as of late, it has been almost just as bad as
Yeah,
the sensory. Yeah, the visual has been really, yeah, really getting to me these days.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, what about what about when you're home? You know, when
hmm
you get home, what's the situation like there?
So I live with a lovely roommate who is aware and is very mindful and cognizant and will
Mm,
ask me before eating a bag of chips. It's so sweet. So that's wonderful. I also have, I'm sure you know about them, the loop headphones,
right, earplugs, I believe,
earplugs
right?
rather.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, they quite literally have saved my life. I plop those in anytime things yeah, get a bit too much, but I often take some time just to go to my room, decompress, kind of put my earplugs in and just sit in a bit of silence. But I find, yeah, my home environment is probably where it acts up the least.
Hmm.
I would say, yeah, more public spaces like cafes and work and things like that trigger me a lot more.
Yeah. And how
hmm
about going out with friends? Like, do you socially, are your friends aware?
Yeah, so it's so funny. I'm still, I've been dealing with this since I was 11 years old, and the
Mm-hmm.
stigma is still so alive and well. Like, I'm so hesitant to tell people about it
Mm-hmm.
because I'm oftentimes embarrassed or ashamed because I it feels almost so insensitive to be upset by the sound of somebody chewing or making any kind of noise that can be triggering. So a few of my friends do know, but I think for me a lot of times it's removing myself from the situation, which isn't always productive, but it's usually the most like alleviating. So just
Yeah.
completely removing myself from the situation, or closing my eyes if it's visual.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
How do you? I'm just getting curious. How do you tell them that you have to go, or is it just like they turn around and it's like, "Where's Alex?"
Um, no, I try my best to be as civilized as possible.
Right, right, right. I
There was
guess we
definitely,
have to be civilized at times
I
with these
suppose,
people.
yeah. I mean, when I was a kid, oh, I would like make a scene and storm away and just in complete disgust. But I obviously have have dealt with this long enough to know that that's super inappropriate. Um, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, definitely just kind of, I'll say, I'm just a little overstimulated. I'm just gonna go take a walk,
Mm-hmm.
or yeah, I'm just feeling a bit overwhelmed. I'm gonna take a moment, and I'm very open about other things in my life, and the mental health struggles that we all deal with, and so my friends are always very understanding, and I don't feel the need to go into the
The nitty
gory
gritty.
details.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, let's rewinding way back, like around age 11. What was going on, kind of in your life at home? Your first triggers.
Yeah, so yeah, I was about 11 years old, and the very first time that I think I really noticed it was with my dad. He's a very my family's Eastern European, and
Mm-hmm.
they love their food, and most of my family have like very what's the word, annoying eating habits,
Yeah.
like very, very loud, um, talking with their mouth full. And my dad was very kind of unaware of what those like habits
Mm-hmm.
looked like from an outsider's perspective. And so um, that was definitely the first kind of trigger was my dad, that talking with a mouthful and things like that. And at the time growing up, it was I lived in like a pretty dysfunctional, I would say, like household, and that was the year that my parents were actually separating. And so it's been super interesting to like work through a lot of this in therapy and connect those dots so incredibly, um to be like, oh yes, my life, I was kind of like in this state of fight or flight, things very uncertain, mom and dad yelling, things like happening around me. And I think my body almost like connected this sound and feeling with this need to like escape and like remove myself from an unsafe situation. And I think I have like almost, yeah, the connection between sound, um and yeah, like needing to escape, like moving myself in like a protective mechanism. That's kind of how I've understood how it developed in my little body. But I mean, I'm not entirely sure if that is, based on good scientific evidence, but that's kind of how I've made sense of it in my brain.
Yeah. I don't think science has studied that enough, but if you listen to enough episodes of the podcast, you'll hear that kind of story a lot.
Yeah,
At least a lot of stories that rhyme with that. So
yeah,
that's fascinating that you've been able to yeah, make that connection. Yeah, I'd love to eventually talk more about if you want to, kind of how you got to that point in therapy. But yeah, I
yeah.
mean, you're obviously yeah, a lot of stuff going on there. You're probably trying to protect yourself, but also maybe trying to read the moods of everybody, right? Because you have to probably you figure out when you can interact with other people, or you probably
Yeah.
want a child who wants to make sure that their caregiver is calm. So there's probably a protection in the other direction as well, at least to the extent that you can.
Yeah.
Um, hearing, as I've said before, is one of the earliest warning signs that we have. Right? It's the
Mhm.
hardest thing to block off. So that's I feel like, I don't know. To me, it makes sense that it's one of the things that we become most sensitive to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Did you have siblings as well?
I did. I do. Yeah, I have
Yeah.
two sisters. We're all 5 years apart. Um, and yeah, my younger sister has a milder version,
Mm,
I would say. Not at all to the extent of me. Like growing up was extremely difficult. Like I could barely sit at the table with my family for
yeah.
meals. And but yeah, yeah, they also didn't kind of quite understand at the time, but they really understand now, and it's been nice to have that support and to kind of, yeah, for them to understand how that all came about now that we're older and can reflect on our childhood with an adult brain.
Yeah. How were your reactions when you were going through triggers at that age? Sounds like it was, the typical just, you'd just be dysregulated, probably yelling at family members. Was it kind of really acting out like that, or
uh,
just removing yourself?
it was less, directed at the person. It was more of
Mm,
just dramatically making an exit, like
yeah.
making it known that I was leaving because I was so either like the feeling, the emotion that is evoked most viscerally for me is the feeling of like disgust.
Yeah.
Um, and for me, I was just like, oh my gosh, I have to get out of this. I have to remove myself from the situation. And I wouldn't, try to hide it. I would definitely
Yeah.
like make it known that I was affected and triggered. But outwardly, I would say only very infrequently would I make comments about that. And if I did, usually they were directed to my dad. I would just, be
Mm,
like, can you just chew with your mouth closed, please, for the love of God?
Yeah, yeah. And what was the reaction of your family then?
Oh, not good.
Mm,
They did not understand. They thought, and because it's still so under researched, they just thought this dramatic, teenager who's just trying to get a rise out of people, or I don't know, is just constantly annoyed at their family. But
mm-hmm.
yeah, it took a while for my mom to come around. She finally did and was like very lovely in the end about it. My dad, on the other hand, not so much.
To this
But
day.
to this day,
Mm.
yeah,
How did your or yeah, then how did your relationship then evolve with each of your parents? As you know, this was obviously, I mean, sometimes it is a wedge. It becomes a wedge. I'm
for
just kind of
sure.
curious how that. Do you, well, if you want to get into it, kind of how was your relationship with your parents, and even your, sounds like it's better with your siblings, and then how much do you attribute that to misophonia?
Yeah, that's a great question.
For me, it was a big
So
deal. I'll just say that, but
yeah,
and it is for a lot of people. Yeah.
yeah, I definitely, like, my misophonia has always been the worst with my mom and dad, and I know that comes from a deep rooted resentment that I have towards both of them, just because of my upbringing. It's actually it's quite bad with my mom. I unfortunately don't have any kind of relationship with my mom anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it is because of kind of the unraveling and recollecting and kind of coming to terms with how this condition has manifested in my body. A lot of it has to do with the dysregulation that I felt growing up, with the lack of emotional support and security.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of like neglect, and
Mm-hmm.
kind of we were all just left to fend for ourselves, and have all kind of come out with very troubled nervous systems and minds, and we've kind of been picking up the pieces ever since. But
Your siblings as well, right? Like maybe not
yeah,
necessarily misophonia, but other things.
totally, yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, my older sister struggles like a lot with a lot of OCD symptoms. And yeah, it's just so interesting because we can, just attribute all of it to the dynamics and the
Mm-hmm.
environment of growing up. But yeah, it has been interesting to see, to explore why it was always the worst with my parents. Uh and yeah, I just see so clearly now why that was the case. Thankfully my dad and I are quite close. I do like they're all live in Ontario, so I don't see my family very often, and I think that's why my dad and I have
For the
such a
audience,
good
Ontario is very
relationship.
far away from Victoria. So yes,
Yes.
I'm from Ontario, so I know
You
how
get
hard it is. Yeah.
it. Yeah. And so I often think to myself that my dad and I only have a relationship because
Mm.
of the distance, because you know uh yeah, we yeah, and that's but I'm grateful for that, and my sisters and I are quite close. And it's nice to be able to bond with siblings over dysfunction and
Yeah, yeah.
childhood trauma and stuff.
Not to
Um
not to dwell, but I'm just curious because your sounds like your dad was the worst trigger and doesn't understand to this day. But and you said, I think you said your mom thinks um were better in the end, but you have no relationship with her. Do you want to, I don't know,
mhm.
uh,
Yeah, I guess
explain
that.
that a little bit,
Yeah,
just
I guess
because
that
people
sounds a
might be
bit.
wondering? Yeah.
Yes, that's pretty confusing. Um, so, without like, yeah, making a like, I'll
Yeah.
make a painfully long story short. Um, my my mom, I suppose, became more understanding of my misophonia, but more out of avoidance of conflict. Like, it was less about easing my symptoms and more about, I don't want anything to do with this. I'm not going to give her any reason to like resent or be upset with
Mm-hmm.
me. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
just going to like never eat with her or be near her when I'm eating or doing anything. Um, so she, although like it was very helpful, it didn't really come from a place of love and support. I
The
think
kind of
when I
continuation of the pattern, I guess. Sounds like of neglect. But
yeah,
yeah.
and that is a large reason why my mom and I have no relationship
Mm-hmm.
is like the lack of accountability for what went on growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of parental alienation when my parents split up. And so I actually didn't have a relationship with my dad for about like 5 years of my life in my like early adolescence. And so despite the fact that my dad is still not very understanding of my misophonia, we've just come such a long way and have rebuilt our relationship
Yeah.
in so many ways. Um, that yeah, it, although he doesn't get it, he's very, set in his ways, conservative,
Mm-hmm.
man, but he has taken accountability for a lot of other things that have gone on, and I think for that my resentment has really settled. Whereas with my mom, it's completely it's alive and well.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't know. I think the misophonia is only, one component of it. There's just a whole other,
Right. Yep.
there's other layers there.
Yep. Lots of layers. And yeah, just one more thing about that. Just curious. Your dad's still triggering you, but do you find this might be a slow process, but like starting to I don't know, resolve maybe resolve some of those layers? Is that affecting maybe the misophonia with your dad at all, or not yet?
It is interesting. The closer of a relationship I'd have with my dad and the less I see him,
Mm-hmm.
when I'm with him, those interactions feel a lot more intentional.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't feel like those triggers affect me as much.
Mm-hmm.
And I really do try to make a point of like removing myself or making sure that I'm not even in a place where I can be triggered almost.
Using
Um,
your agency that you have now that you definitely didn't have back then. It sounds like.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, yeah, definitely since, yeah, rebuilding and reworking that relationship with my dad, there's a lot more love and emotional support there overall. I mean, maybe not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily with the misophonia, but in other areas that
Yeah.
it does alleviate those triggers a whole lot.
Right. Right. No, that's great. I mean, you probably still have that inner child that kind of where those memories are imprinted, but at least maybe there's some movement.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
Fascinating. Yeah, probably kind of like maybe revisit this kind of thing later on. I'm just kind of curious, like at school and stuff.
Yeah.
What was going on there? Maybe friends.
Yeah. Yeah. So I went to McMaster University. I
Oh
graduated in
yeah, Hamilton.
yeah, in Hamilton. Yeah, in 2021 I graduated. Um and that was tough. The big lecture halls were hard.
Mm-hmm.
The typing on the laptop, oh, that would get me. Um Crinkling of things, people eating in class. I had to leave class so many times during my undergrad. Um
Did you get any
that was,
accommodations or anything at all?
I could have. I am
Mm-hmm.
sure of it, but I never accessed them because I always thought that I would be met with um I don't know, maybe like shock or disbelief that I
Ridicule or yeah.
yeah, ridicule, to be like, are you serious? and and I think because of that I just was like, I'll figure it out on my own. I always, I've done it my whole life pretty much, so I'll just
Mm-hmm.
continue on. And yeah, also too the leg bounce when people are like fidgeting with their
Between
leg
the
or their
leg, yeah. Mm-hmm.
yeah, that visual playing with your hair, like twirling of hair. That one, that visual stimuli is really uh that one gets me a lot. And I was recently in class just at a college here in Victoria for about 6, 7 months, and the classes were very small, but I too would have to leave quite often or
Hmm.
close my eyes or wear my earplugs because yeah, the stimuli was just so close and constant. It was very hard to concentrate and, ground myself. But I did the best I could. I made it out alive.
Yeah,
But
that's right. That is
yeah,
sometimes
but it
our
it
best
was
consolation. Yeah.
yeah.
And how about and then I guess you went out. Well, so I would imagine with your friends, it was still kind of case by case basis, like who got to know.
Yeah.
Yeah. When did you realize that it had a name? When did you find out it had a name?
Oh, probably when I was about 15 or 16.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I was in high school and I think I like I think I like Googled why do I feel disgusted when my like dad eats or
Mm-hmm.
something like
Mm-hmm.
that. And like came across this like one news article on misophonia or something.
Yeah.
And they, broke it down in the Latin terms and it's like the hatred of sound or whatever that
Right.
definition is. And I went, "Oh my God, I think I have that."
Yeah. Yeah.
and and I actually started going to therapy specifically for that. And
Oh, okay. Okay.
yeah, at about 15. And at that point it was more just trying to learn coping strategies. It wasn't actually till I was in my 20s that a new therapist I found was like, "Hey, this is probably connected to your childhood and stuff." um so yeah, but yeah, probably around 15 is when I like learned about it and was able to kind of like conceptualize it and to tell my friends to be like, "Hey, this has a name. I don't feel as crazy anymore."
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so, what did that first therapist try to do or offer?
Yeah. Um it was not helpful, I don't think. I mean,
Yeah, no one knew what it was. Well, not many people knew what it was back then.
right. So a lot of it was kind of just like learning to regulate. So, drawing
Mm,
attention to breath, drawing attention to an object, doing the five senses.
right.
I often, what I did a lot growing up was I would rub the tops of my thighs with my hands, just like up and down. That was like a soothing tactic that I've used a
Mm-hmm.
lot, just kind of
Mm-hmm.
paying attention to like the feeling and that sensation of that. But yeah, it was mostly like self-soothing tactics and um yeah, that's really
Yeah.
all it was, pretty like that I can remember at least. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was about 10
Yeah.
years.
It's funny. 10 years ago. Yeah, this one. Once the news articles start to come out, I actually heard. I read a news article in 2007, and it was actually on CTV, CTV.ca of all places.
Oh my God, yeah.
Um, um, so yeah, it predated most of the like popular articles that you hear about now.
Yeah.
So Canada kind of leading a little bit there. Um, well, yeah. So I guess then, yeah, I'm curious about that newer therapist. Is that someone you're still seeing now?
Um yes and no. They operate out of Ontario.
Oh, okay.
And because I'm here, I do see a therapist here, but we are still kind of like in touch in a lot of ways. Like she
Hmm.
was my therapist for like almost 4 years. She really helped me through a lot of it. And for her, yeah, making that connection to the like need to flee, the
Yeah.
need to escape as a child, um, and finding that escape through that like fight or flight response that was triggered by a lot of the things that my parents did.
Hmm.
Um, that connection, and that kind of like diving into that like deep rooted resentment and that feeling of just like disgust and annoyance and needing to like get away. She often would just say like that was your body's way of protecting you, like you were
Hmm.
just trying to get yourself out of a situation and your brain made that connection to things like sound, or like visual stimuli And yeah, I think, it started to make so much more sense when she would ask me, well, why do you think it's the worst with your mom and dad? And, you know, of course it was. I mean, they were
You
my
mean the people
parents.
who like the people who kind of
Yeah.
like left me to fend for myself? Yeah, that
Yeah.
kind
They're
of makes
supposed to protect me and stuff, and
yeah.
I kind of had to figure it out on my own and like learn to regulate on my own. And
Where were you living with your mom or your dad back then?
so at the time, I only, so when my parents split up, yeah, I lived only with my mom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was very kind of the visiting and such with my dad was very unfair, I guess you could say. Like there was never like any legal
Mm,
documentation about how often they got to see us. So we lived with our mom, and our mom kind of
the
made the
rules.
choice of when
Yeah.
we would see our dad. So I lived with my mom for most of my life.
Mm-hmm. And
Yeah.
what did she do in terms of work and what was her kind of like, I don't know, day to day?
Yeah, she worked for like this company called the Lago London. It's just they lease equipment to
Mm-hmm.
like hospitals, and like I don't know, they manufacture products. It's a very boring job, but she
Okay.
worked
Yeah.
as a like collections agent, and I don't think was very fulfilled in her life. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, definitely had like a lot of undiagnosed mental health conditions, which hurt people, that whole thing. It's like trauma is so cyclical. Um, and so yeah, she struggled growing up, or sorry, she struggled while we were growing up. And um yeah, so I that's yeah, it was just a lot of, you know, walking on eggshells and just, being hyper vigilant of everyone's emotions and such. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and what was her maybe her childhood like? Was it did she grow up here? Kind of was there anything notable?
Yeah, so my mom is the oldest of 10 kids.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So she started parenting at age 4.
Yeah.
Was like changing diapers and feeding her baby brothers and sisters when she was like still a toddler herself. And yeah, she grew up in what's it, not Godridge, and that's kind of like near London, Ontario.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, my grandparents were like very religious,
Mm,
and very strict. Uh, and yeah, my mom kind of just grew up far too fast, and then
mm-hmm.
got married, and had kids, and the parenting never stopped. And I don't think she ever took a moment to reflect on her own childhood and what that might have done for her. And I think
Right.
because of that, those like resentments came out in her parenting. And yeah, I mean, I have a lot of compassion for my mom, like regardless of it
Mm-hmm.
all. I understand, not everyone has the best experiences growing up, but I think it's just the way she goes sometimes.
Interesting. I'm curious. Maybe your dad. Did he grow up here too, or what was his kind of like childhood
Yeah, his
like?
was fairly normal
Mm-hmm.
from what I understand. Yeah, I grew up in Etobicoke, raised by my babcia and opa. So they both immigrated. My babcia from Poland, my opa from Austria.
Mm-hmm.
Um, had 2 kids. I have an aunt who's my dad's sister, of course. I know their relationship is pretty tumultuous, but
Mm,
yeah, I think they butt heads with the parents as they do, but I'm pretty sure for the most part my dad's childhood was, I mean, he doesn't express his emotions
mm-hmm.
at all, really. I don't know that was happening when they were growing up.
I
Um
doubt it. I doubt it.
yeah, definitely not. So in that regard, yeah, I think he's been silenced a lot of his life and has never really learned how to express
Yeah.
emotions.
Right.
appropriately.
Right. So you guys probably didn't feel that much from your parents growing up. It sounds like there
No.
was always something going on. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It was like dad retreated and, shut down, and mom blew up and yelled. And it was like, pick your
Wow.
poison. Which one is better?
Yeah. And jumping, I jump around. Jumping to that second therapist. How quick? So did you go to her to about misophonia in particular, or was it you were starting needed to kind of like explore what happened?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. When I went to therapy, I didn't even know what I was going to therapy for. I was
Mm.
like, I just should probably like maybe start talking about stuff. And it's crazy. Because
How did you realize that? Just people listening might be like, on the fence or about to hit that moment.
yeah, I think I just in my body knew
Hmm.
that something existed in my body that I didn't know how to address. And I was like, I just feel this need. And I think I felt the resentment towards my mom building up so deeply, like it was bubbling, almost bubbling over. And I wanted to like explore that, but I had no idea where that exploration would take me. Um, so my first session, I like told my therapist, she told me this 3 years later. She said, our first therapy session, you said, my mom and I have a great relationship. My mom is my best friend.
Sorry, I'm laughing, but that's
No,
that's that's
it's quite
probably
comical.
yeah, yeah. That
Yeah,
says a lot there, I think,
totally. And
of
three
how we
years
kind of
later,
protect ourselves or protect what happened to us and put a shiny coat on.
100%. I went into therapy being like, I had a great childhood. My childhood was totally fine. I mean, minus the fact that my parents split up, like it was all good, all great. And then, as I would say things, she was like, "No, not all
Hmm.
good.
Hmm.
Definitely not all good." And making those connections with the sound sensitivity, um, and just unraveling everything and having someone say, hey, you were a kid and you needed a lot more than you were given, and you were forced to kind of, yeah, like be I'm a very independent person and I am very grateful for that, but that wasn't really my choice. Like I just had to be. I had to take care of myself, take care of my sisters. That was the kind of the mediator of the family. And um but yeah, very interesting that I had no idea really what I was going to therapy for, and then I it changed my entire life.
Yeah, sometimes some impulse just kind of does build up, and you kind of know your
Yeah.
your body moves you in that direction. And yeah, I'm no therapist, but you notice that's I kind of wanted to go go to your childhood pretty quickly because I just
Yeah.
to see what happened
No,
because I've
absolutely.
had
It's all
enough of these conversations that I know there might be something there. So I'm glad you found that therapist. That's amazing.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and one other point I want to say is something that that's come up in conversations I've had with people is it's so fascinating that obviously uh, you said that on your first session that everything's good, but I've heard people explain misophonia as kind of a warning sign telling you that there's something wrong when you yourself might think that nothing's wrong. And so in a way, misophonia is kind of like a signal or a message to
Yeah.
you, acting in good faith to try to get you to you know to move somewhere better, which sounds like you're moving towards something better, despite still having misophonia, and
Hmm.
hopefully we'll get over that soon. But it's interesting. It's I like to kind of sometimes think of misophonia as almost a positive thing in some ways,
Yeah.
if it can help you unravel a lot of these things that happen to you.
100%. Because I think that's how I stored a lot of my trauma, is through that. I like my body and my mind fixated, hyper fixated on these sounds as like, I don't know, like a protective measure. And it's almost like my body was like giving me something to focus on, to like distract
Hmm.
my body from what was actually going on around me. And I definitely, yeah, I think that's really interesting to phrase that as a warning sign, because it's not I mean, it's normal in the sense that I've experienced this for so much of my life, but being in a constant state of fight or flight is not normal. It's not how your body is meant to be. And like,
Mm-hmm.
your
Mm-hmm.
body should only go into fight or flight when your body's in danger. And I think for me, so much of my life was this constant state of like, what's going to happen? And yeah, I do think the misophonia really like shed a lot of light on that for me. And I was able to really recognize like, oh wow, my little brain and body was just trying to protect me, and this pattern and this connection is like how that happened almost.
Yeah. How did
Yeah.
you, so what is your current therapist like helping you do maybe to address misophonia, or have you, oh, actually, it sounds like you've been there for a few years. I'm curious if you've, I don't know if she's kind of helped you through anything, coping methods or modalities.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me the biggest part was like gaining a sense of control over it, and I think I gained a lot of control over it once I realized its root.
Mm-hmm.
And so now when these things come up, I'm like, okay, this is not about this person. This person's doing nothing wrong. This has everything to do with, like young Alex who, you know, used this as kind of like a mechanism to yeah, I don't know, survive, like a
Mm-hmm.
survival mechanism. And so having that ability to kind of like talk myself down and say, hey, like this is okay. This is not like there's something that's a lot bigger going on. It's not this person who is like eating chips or something. But I think a lot of the stuff that I've been working on with my therapist is just being able to recognize in the moment and actively try not to avoid. I think for so much of my life, I've taken the easy way out of isolating,
Mm-hmm.
avoiding,
Mm-hmm.
leaving the room, escaping. And I've really tried the kind of exposure therapy, for lack of a better term,
Mm-hmm.
um, of forcing myself to sit in the discomfort and to develop a different response. So
Mm-hmm.
normally, like today, for example, I also work at a naturopath clinic in reception, just part-time. And I'm working today, and someone behind me in the like charting room was eating their food, and it wasn't the sound of them eating that bothered me. It was the cutlery hitting the bowl, like that repetitive sound of cutlery hitting a dish
Yep.
is the most, I think, maybe the most triggering sound for me right now. And normally I would go to the back and like close the door and, be away from it. And I just sat there and I listened to the sound, and I just like took a few deep breaths and just like tried to hear the sound, not in a like, I don't know, I tried to like
Reframe it.
reframe,
Yeah.
yeah, reframe what that sound means to me. And it's obviously so much easier said than done. And I did not
Yeah.
do it gracefully, believe me. But I just sat there and really tried to like breathe and just hear the sound differently, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you think that exposure therapy gets a really bad name because I don't think you can just jump into exposure therapy without some of that background work that you did, right? Like not
Totally.
having made that connection, not knowing where some of these reactions came from. Do you think you'd be able to do that?
Absolutely not.
Right. I mean, because some of the things that you're describing, like knowing the root, like I now know the root cause, which it didn't have exactly the same reaction background as you did, but a lot of let's just say some overlap there.
Right.
But just knowing now, yeah, where my reactions kind of come from, perhaps where they were rooted in. I can now listen to sounds and kind of intercept myself a little bit,
Hmm.
and just try to like intercept, talk myself, kind of like we used to talk myself down. To me, I try to talk to my inner child, and just give that validation and love, and that can kind of make the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, the inner child work is so helpful because that's where it all started. And I think it's so important to be like, hey, it's all good. We can do this.
Hmm.
Yeah.
How about and has it helped in maybe and you don't have to get into it, but yeah, comorbid conditions? You said like some of your siblings have other conditions. I'm curious if you've experienced other things as well. Like a lot of us have, I don't know, ADHD or maybe OCD or bipolar things like that.
Yeah. Well, I
Anxiety.
definitely, yeah, I've struggled with depression for, I'd say probably the last like 4 years of my life. Um, and yeah, of course, like attribute a lot of those symptoms to, um, yeah, my upbringing and not knowing how to regulate my emotions and having a lot of relationships, not tarnished, but maybe just like more tumultuous relationships, just because lack of emotional, just not really being able to articulate or vocalize the things that I'm experiencing because a lot of my upbringing was very, yeah, you just you didn't talk about anything. Everything was, you
Nope.
know, under the rug.
Right.
Everything's fine. Everything's all good, even though shit was not good. Sorry if I'm not that
That's fine.
far.
People who stay to the end are good with that.
um, yeah, and so, um, yeah, that has been extremely tough, and I think on my harder days, I find like, triggers are more common. I think when I'm already kind of on edge or I'm having a low day, I think, yeah, the visual or sensory stimuli can be a bit more overwhelming.
Yep.
But I've managed quite well. Like I'm in therapy, and I um, was very like happy to find a medication that worked really well for me and have been like probably the most stable I've been in my life in a really long time, and for that I'm like very grateful. But yeah, I definitely still struggle, yeah, with like, I don't know if I'd call it chronic depression, but um some form of like, yeah, like, let's call it chronic just for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
But yeah, um and
So
then
the
my
medication
sister.
kind of helped with that a little bit.
Yeah.
It sounds like. Did that affect misophonia at all? Usually doesn't. I'm just just
No.
putting that out there. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think so. I will say I found probably though in the last 4 years my misophonia has triggered more like anxiety inducing symptoms,
Mm.
um more than ever before. I usually would find that when I've been triggered in the past, it's just like a fight or flight. I need to get out of here. But I found, yeah, in more recent years, that feeling of like being very on edge, or almost being like anxious to go places because I'm like, oh my God, I can't
Mm.
imagine going to the movie theaters and, sitting around people who are also eating. And I find like that kind of anticipatory anxiety, or
Right.
that anticipating those triggers before they even happen, has been that has been the only thing that I would say has maybe been different. And I don't know if that has any relation to, like depression or anxiety that I experience, but I'm sure it does.
Mm-hmm,
Yeah.
hmm. Yeah. And you mentioned a little bit about relationships. I'm kind of curious you know, how did that work out? You said maybe tarnish something, but I don't know. Like, did you have any people who were understanding or not understanding, or things that just fell apart because of misophonia?
Yeah, I think I wouldn't say that was like the the sole kind of reason. But I think for me, not being able to articulate
Mm-hmm.
misophonia or feeling ashamed and not expressing what that looked like for me in my life and how that influences a lot of my interactions and like the way I exist in the world. Previous partners maybe didn't know the extent of that. And so oftentimes I would become, you know, deeply resentful of this person because I'm, you know, their things are, they're doing something, they're eating or um, fidgeting or something, and I feel too embarrassed and ashamed to say anything. And as we know, you bottle things up, resentment builds, and then
What are you talking about? Yeah. Yep.
uh,
Check. Yep.
yeah. And so I think, I mean, not to say that that was like what cost me a relationship, but I think misophonia definitely contributed a lot to like resentments that I created towards a person without even realizing it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because I just I don't even know, yeah, I didn't know how to say it without sounding, for lack of a better term, crazy. Like I really was called that a lot by my dad growing up. Like he was like, "You're crazy.
Really?
Like this is insane." How like he was so like,
That's what you did back then. I mean, back in the
yeah,
20th century. Yeah.
seriously. And I internalized that. I think I was like, "Oh my god, I'm crazy. Like this is so abnormal and I shouldn't have." Yeah, I just felt so, I think I felt a lot of guilt for
Mm-hmm.
expressing it to people. And that has just kind of, that had backfired a lot because it just, that guilt causes me to shut down and stay quiet, but then also resentment
Oh
builds
yeah.
and
The
yeah.
layers. Those. Oh, the layers.
The layers, the
Yeah.
layers, yes, you get it.
Um. Well, yeah. Fascinating. Well, I'm glad. I mean, glad. Your therapist is able to make those connections, and yeah, I
Yeah.
hope things. You're still young. Hopefully, things will start to work out. Especially as you get to other relationships and maybe have your own children and whatnot. Maybe the cycle can break. At
Yeah.
least I know you won't call them crazy.
Yeah.
That'll be a win. Um, yeah, but Alex, yeah, I don't know. Anything else you want? Anything else you want to share with people as we start to close out here?
Yeah, no, I guess like the only thing that I'd say is that it is, despite the nicheness and lack of research on this thing, it is very real, and I just sympathize so deeply with anyone who experiences it in any way, shape, or form because it can be such a debilitating thing to live with. And I think just, yeah, I think it's so important to have these conversations and to be able to articulate and make connections because it's a hard, like, we all struggle in life, but I think it's like, yeah, this is a very real thing that is affecting people for so many reasons. And I'm just, yeah, I'm stoked that you have this podcast and are cultivating spaces where people can talk about it because, yeah, I just think that's awesome.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Well said. And yeah, I mean, I started the podcast, yeah, wanting to tell stories, but not realizing that I was going to find all these patterns, which has
Yeah,
helped me as well.
I
So,
bet.
yeah, thanks again for sharing your story. And I know people will listen and this will resonate a lot. So,
And thank you. You're a great host. I like the questions you asked. So, yeah, I appreciate you having me on here.
thanks again, Alex. Very excited for your journey and everything you've been able to process so far. I think this is the way. If you liked this episode, don't forget to leave a quick review or just hit the 5 stars wherever you listen to the podcast. You can hit me up by email at hello@misophoniapodcast.com or go to the website, misophoniapodcast.com. It's even easier just to send a message on Instagram at Misophonia Podcast. You can follow there, Facebook, and on X or Twitter, it's Misophonia Show. Support the show by visiting Patreon at patreon.com/Misophonia Podcast. The music, as always, is by Moby. And until next week, wishing you peace and quiet.